there's a specific moment that gives you away. Not the moment you show up with the tools. Not the moment you talk someone down from the edge of a bad decision at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. Not even the moment you quietly absorb a room full of other people's anxiety and somehow convert it into a plan before anyone else has finished processing what went wrong. The moment that gives you away is the one right after. When someone turns to you and says, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and you smile, and you say something small, and you move on. Because sitting inside a compliment for too long feels almost as uncomfortable as asking for help in the first place. If you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I think you do, then stay with this for a few minutes. Because what's actually happening underneath that pattern is more specific, more layered, and honestly more worth understanding than most people are willing to go looking for. This isn't about being strong or selfless. It goes somewhere a little less comfortable than that. You're the one people call, not one of the people, the person. When the situation is genuinely bad, not inconvenient, actually bad, your number is the one that gets dialed. And you answer. Every time. Without making it weird. Without sighing loudly or making them feel like they caught you at the wrong moment. You just show up and you start working the problem. And here's the thing. You're good at it. Not in a lucky way. In a trained, experienced, quietly competent way. You've read the room 1,000 times. You know when someone needs a solution, and when they just need someone to stay on the line. You've developed an almost instinctive ability to find the crack in any situation and figure out what's holding it together and what needs to go. People around you assume this is just your personality, that you were born with a higher capacity for handling things. That's not entirely wrong. But it's not the whole story. Most fixers didn't choose this role. They grew into it because at some point, usually earlier than they'd like to remember, the alternative stopped feeling safe. It's rarely dramatic. It's not always a single event you can point to. More often, it's a slow accumulation. A household where things were unstable and someone had to hold steady. A parent who was doing their best, but whose best was already fully allocated. A moment where you expressed a need, clearly, honestly. And what came back wasn't what you were hoping for. Not cruelty, necessarily. Just absence. A gap where the response should have been. And you were young enough that your brain did what young brains do. It adapted. It drew a very quiet, very permanent conclusion. The most reliable path forward is the one I build myself. The problem with conclusions like that is they don't expire. You don't grow out of them the way you grow out of a jacket. They become the architecture. They become the way you move through every room, every relationship, every situation where something needs handling. So now, years later, you're not being self-reliant because you've rationally assessed that no one around you is capable. You're being self-reliant because it stopped occurring to you that there was another option. The reflex is that old, that deep. Here's where it gets harder to look at directly. Being the fixer isn't just something you do. At some point, it became something you are. Your internal sense of worth, the quiet story you run about what makes you valuable, what earns you your place in the room. It's built on that foundation. On being the capable one. On competence that doesn't need to be announced, because it just speaks through results. And that's not nothing. That's genuinely earned. You've shown up in ways that mattered. You have a track record that's real. But here's the cost. When your identity is built on being the one who handles things, asking for help doesn't just feel inconvenient. It feels like a direct threat to who you believe yourself to be. It's not ego. It's closer to survival. There was a study, Kahneman and colleagues, building on decades of self-perception research, that found people whose sense of self is strongly tied to competence experience requests for help as genuinely destabilizing. Not emotionally uncomfortable in a passing way. Actually destabilizing, like the ground shifted slightly underfoot. Because you're not just asking someone to carry a box. You're briefly becoming the person who can't carry the box. And that person doesn't fit inside the story you've been running since you were 9 years old. There's a specific thing that happens when someone tries to support a fixer emotionally. They start to offer something, comfort, presence, a genuine attempt to sit with them in something hard. And the fixer is already 3 steps ahead. Already problem solving. already converting the emotional moment into something actionable, something they can move through rather than actually occupy. It's fine. I've already thought about it. Here's my plan. Being held, emotionally or otherwise, can feel almost intrusive to someone who built their whole internal world around not needing it. Because being held requires you to be still, and being still in vulnerability, in the actual experience of not having it together, is the exact state they've spent years learning to exit as quickly as possible. So they fix that too. They fix their own feelings. Alone. Efficiently. And they move on. And it works mostly. Right up until it doesn't. Now we're at the part that takes the most honesty. Somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the competence, the identity, the discomfort with receiving, there's a belief. It usually lives in a part of you that doesn't use words. It's more like a feeling that's been around so long it just feels like fact. The belief is this: needing something from someone is taking something from them. That showing up with a problem, with your hands empty instead of full, is a kind of imposition. That you are adding to someone's weight rather than reducing it. And that is not something you're willing to do. Because you know what it looks like to be someone's weight. You've seen it. Maybe you've been it once, briefly, and you've spent years making sure it never happens again. The cruel irony is this: you are almost certainly extraordinary at being there for other people. You would never, not once, make someone feel like a burden for reaching out to you. You'd be quietly insulted if someone suggested you would. And yet you are absolutely, completely, sincerely certain that you would be a burden if the situation were reversed. That's not a character flaw. That's a wound that healed crooked. The advice you'll find most places on this is to just ask for help more. To practice vulnerability. To let people in. That advice isn't wrong. It's just the last step being treated like the first step. You can't simply decide to rewire a belief that you formed before you had the language to describe it. That's not how any of this works. The actual shift, the one that's slower and less satisfying to talk about, starts with a single question you have to genuinely sit with, not just intellectually acknowledge. What if needing something doesn't actually cost the people around you what you think it does? Not as a reassuring statement, as a real, open question. Because most of the people in your life, the ones you've shown up for, the ones who dial your number, they're not there because of what you can do for them. Or, at least, not only that. They're there because of you. And they've been quietly waiting for you to let them prove that. The fixer identity isn't a cage. You don't have to dismantle who you are. You just have to make enough room in that identity for one new possibility. That sometimes you get to be the one who calls. If something in this landed, and I mean actually landed, not just intellectually made sense, it's worth paying attention to that feeling. Not fixing it. Not moving past it quickly. Just noticing it. That's actually where the shift starts. Not in the asking. In the noticing. There's a link in the description. A set of guided daily resources built specifically for people who tend to carry things quietly and alone. Not more information. Actual structured tools for moving differently, day by day. It's in the pinned comment as well if you want to check it out. And if this video said something you've been needing to hear for a while, subscribing means you'll be there when the next one drops. I'll see you in it.